As far as growth is concerned, and job creating growth, this has been the case for some time, but the number of people in Manchester, who, both percentage-wise and actual number-wise, who are receiving worklessness benefits of any kind is actually smaller than it was pre-recession. That's been the case for some time. And all the economic indicators, whether they're people-based indicators like unemployment figures or they're more general things about hotel occupancy or whatever, say that the economy of Manchester is going to grow very rapidly over the next couple of years again. An obvious example is if we have greater local control over the skills agenda, because skills is absolutely essential both to growth and to people being able to benefit from. The stats for the Troubled Families Initiative, which are based on one lead worker coordinating however many public agencies it is working with a family. In some cases it's in double figures the number of agencies they're coordinating. Fantastic reductions in domestic violence, in antisocial behaviour, in criminality. Fantastic improvements in school attendance, and actually one of the things we found out the Troubled Families work, the single thing that makes the biggest difference to those families is to get the kids to go to school, because once the kids are in school it gives the adults some time to start sorting out their own lives as well. Similarly, and health and social care, work we're doing there. We all like our hospitals. You ever talk about closing one, you have everybody up in arms. They say that our hospitals are full, and I mean this, they are full of old people who shouldn't be there. It's pretty scandalous how many old people are dumped in our hospitals who shouldn't be there. And we're beginning through better integration of health and social care to reduce the number of elderly people who need to go to hospital unnecessarily, reduce the number of people going to A&E. If people do need to go to hospital, and sometimes you do, making sure those stays as short as possible so you can discharge people into a position where they've got adequate care within the community. Actually transforming the way that we deliver services and doing two things. First of all, in all of that, delivering better outcomes for people, and actually Troubled Families is an area where we're delivering outcomes that we've never ever been able to deliver before anywhere in the country, but also doing it more efficiently, more effectively, more cheaply, actually by investing in people in that sort of way to saving money. And we could do a lot more in that way, because austerity isn't going to go away. There isn't suddenly going to be money flooding down on us, and I think doing things in that way means actually we can start to not only protect the most vulnerable, but we can start to support people and communities on that route to independence. Probably since the Thatcher years, we've tended in public services to move to consumerist models of people as customers, the Tesco approach to public service delivery. And what we're talking about now is going back to what I think would be a lot healthier, which is a citizen-based approach to service delivery. And the citizen-based approach, citizens, yes, have rights, they have reasonable expectations, they have entitlements, but they also have responsibilities as well. And what we're trying to do is to build, as part of Manchester going forward, is that right balance between rights and responsibility, and a Manchester that is built on its citizens, not Manchester that's built on a load of customers.
How do you think the relationship between the council and the voluntary sector is going to change in the light of the things that you've just discussed?
First of all, it's always difficult to treat the voluntary sector as homogenous, as a sector. And if we look, there is something like, we've identified, you've probably been part of that, Mac, something like 3,000 voluntary sector organisations operating within the city, and the vast majority of those are very small, micro, neighbourhood level organisations, and that ranges through to a very small number. They're actually multi-million-pound operations, and it means that I think the sector will be part of the new Manchester in a whole range of different ways that reflect that diversity within the sector itself. First of all, just in terms of service delivery, the voluntary sector remains in its entirety a very big part of what we, the council, do. I think in the current year, £46 million of our budget will be going to the voluntary sector to deliver a whole range of stuff. That's a big chunk of money. So it's a bit more than the £250,000 I talked about for alleviating food poverty. 46 million. That's some of that's grants. Actually, about 9 million is grants. The rest of it is admission services and contracts. So, going to be a large part of providing services. But I think there are other roles, and in many respects, more important roles that I think the voluntary sector will play or can play in that creating responsible citizens. And at our last but one Labour group meeting, we got councillors from Russia to talk about some work that's going on in South Russia aimed at increasing recycling rates. Increasing recycling rates is not only good for the environment, it's also actually good for the council taxpayer as well, because the more we recycle, the less we have to pay to send your rubbish to landfill. And what they were doing was working with local community groups effectively on a peer pressure approach to increasing recycling rates. It relates to what I was talking about, behaviour change, but this was behaviour change that the council was coming along and doing to a neighbourhood. This was something that the neighbourhood was doing to itself, and I think that is a sort of area where real differences can be made.
Oh, thanks. That reflects well on another question that I think we were looking at, as where's the balance going to fall between the sort of small local community engagement and regeneration type work and the large scale infrastructure projects. I think that's probably answered that. Would you agree? Yeah?
Well, I just say perhaps one more thing to add to that is that within that grants programme I talked about, a large amount of that is things like cash grants, which is relatively small amounts of money with relatively low levels of bureaucracy, and we want to reduce even more the level of bureaucracy to make it proportionate to the amount of money. But a lot of that is very much about trying to build that community capacity. I think
that question of bureaucracy and administration and everything is something that's come up quite a lot today.
We're talking about this about some of the youth contracts we've got, where now I think we're talking about contracts for about £3,000, and you've got almost a page of contract for every pound of it, and that's daft, and we need to do something about it.
That's good to hear, because I think everybody was quite concerned about the transaction costs of us doing business together are going up rather than down, and that's money we can save from the system, so that's really, really promising to hear.
Exactly. The Chamber of Commerce, it's a good start. It's a very high proportional terms, very high number of businesses within the Chamber of Commerce. Tends to represent quite a wide range of business from small to large. So the Chamber of Commerce is a good starting place, as are other representative organisations. So Federation of Small Business, CBI tends to represent larger organisations, but there are those organisations, and to talk to those. And clearly the Local Enterprise Partnership, it's a public-private partnership, but it's private sector led. Engaging with the Local Enterprise Partnership is also, I think, something that you can usefully do. But the starting point has got to be about creating a dialogue, and if you're really going to work together, is working out what the common interest is. And
one of the things that we talked about in relation to the way the economy's going in the city is the fact that although things do seem generally to be improving, we have seen a rise in the people that groups here work with of the sort of the in-work poor, and a feeling that the jobs that are being created aren't necessarily bringing that sort of economic success to some of the families that are affected by that. So can you talk a bit about what the council's doing to promote good quality employment?
Well, clearly one of the issues of the government's benefit cuts programme, although they talk about making work pay, that they're having a negative impact on more working families than they are on non-working families. So I think that we have to continue to make that case with government. If I think the objective of making work pay is quite a good one, but that's not what they're doing at the moment, and we need to get that over. In terms of the jobs that are being created within within the city. I can say that we face a massive problem at the moment of shortage of skills. And so I talked earlier about the evolution of skills to a more local level. Most of the jobs that are being created tend to actually be medium to higher value jobs. What we don't have is a Manchester population with quite often the skill levels or even attitude levels to be able to benefit from that, and we need to be able to address that. It's a lot better than it was 10 years ago, and the number of people with no skills whatsoever has halved within the city over that period of time. At the other end, the number of graduates within the labour market has almost doubled over the same period of time. So we have made a lot of progress, but we need to make a lot more progress in that particular area. Council includes paid its own minimum wage. It doesn't pay living wage yet, although we aspire to do that. Addressing wage levels is certainly something we need to do, particularly at the low end of the wage scale. But actually, it's one of the things you will see over the next year, after about 3 or 4 years of wages being very flat, as the economy picks up, that you are going to start seeing wage rises as well. And the CBI, the Chamber of Commerce, in its last quarterly survey, reported for the first time that in the next wage round they are beginning to get significant above inflation pay claims. That's kind of one of the almost inevitable bits of the economy picking up.
I think that was a thing that came up quite a lot in terms of wanting to see the council go further with that in terms of the social values sort of approach, and recognise that Manchester's been at the forefront with some of that living wage stuff in the past, and it's like, we'd really support that.
Well, we were the first council to have above the national minimum wage, Manchester minimum wage. So we were a leader in that. There are clearly financial aspects of it which can't be ignored, but there are other things that we are actively promoting. So, for example, the City Council itself, every entry-level job is now an apprenticeship, and that's a proper apprenticeship. There is a skill guarantee for any council worker to be able to train to at least MVQ level 2. So we are doing making our own contribution to upping the skill levels, but we are also actively working particularly with the private sector, particularly to promote apprenticeships, which aren't purely for young people anymore, to try and make sure that we do increase skill levels within the city. And that actually goes with skill jobs tend to be good jobs.
I guess we've just got a couple more questions. One is, in the light of all the tough decisions that are having to be made at the moment and will have to be made in the future, what do you see as being the sector's role in influencing those decisions and influencing the formation of policy?
Well, I think that falls into two issues, and I think you have a role in both. And first of all, it is what we do. It's about the choices we make. And you talked about engagement, but clearly you are able to have dialogue directly with the City Council at a whole range of levels, and you feed into some of the bodies like the Health and Wellbeing Board, so you play a part in some of the decision making that goes on. So there is a role in influencing and inputting into what we do. I think there's potentially a bigger role though in because what we do is very constrained. It's about how we do it and making sure that we continue to be. The voluntary sector is not very good at innovation, by the way. So it tends to get stuck in ruts very easily. But it is actually about challenging, I think, the council and other public sector agencies to always be trying to be, I think, driven by the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, not about the processes that we're engaged in. And it is still, I talked about public service reform, and part of that public service reform is for it to work, it has to become, we have to commission services according to outcomes. It's still the case, too much of what we do and what the rest of the public sector does is input-driven programmes rather than outcome-driven programmes.
I think that's something certainly I hear a lot in the sector is we'd be very interested in outcomes-focused commissioning, but sometimes the processes that go with it distort the results in terms of how we can engage with them as a sector. But I think that, just to move us on to the last question, because we're conscious of time, we wanted to ask you, because of your background working in both the voluntary sector and the public sector, what do you find most frustrating about the voluntary sector first?
Well, I say, having been engaged with the voluntary sector for a very long period of time, I'll tell you a story which will illustrate the frustration. It's when the Labour government established community networks, and through that the Manchester Partnership, and the very first Manchester Partnership, I think the steering group at that time, it changed its form a number of times. It was about 40 or 50 strong. It had something like a dozen representatives from the community network on it. It's supposed to be representing the diversity of the voluntary sector in Manchester. And at the very first meeting of this steering group, which, bear in mind, the steering group didn't really have a lot of power, but it got to an issue, a difficult issue, and the voluntary sector had to ask for an adjournment so that they could have a caucus in order to be able to come up to a common view on the issue that we were discussing. So I was chairing it, so I asked the question, given that you're supposed to represent the diversity of the voluntary sector, wouldn't it be better if you brought a range of views to the meeting? So no, we want a common view. And what do you expect the rest of us to do while you have a caucus? And they said, well, don't you want a caucus as well? And I said, no, we don't. And I guess what that illustrates to me, one of my frustrations with the voluntary sector, is that at times you can be the most process-driven group of people rather than outcome-driven group of people imaginable. You can spend absolutely hours talking about, in meetings, about how you do things rather than getting on with it. And if I'm going to be honest, over very many years, that's my biggest frustration.
I think perhaps some of the frustration of that might be shared by colleagues in the room who had to sit through many of those meetings and processes, but we'll move swiftly on from that.
Oh, I don't want to make on a negative, Mike, that's for sure.
The second half is the public sector.
Oh, my
reflecting on that.
I guess my frustrations with the public sector are really it's effectively its obsession with institutional self-preservation. Again, I'll give you an example really of that from work we are doing on integrating health and social care. So this is real work on the ground. So this is involving social care professionals, health professionals, probably some people from the voluntary sector as well. But it is talking about how do we keep some of those elderly people out of hospital, which is a really bad place for them to be. And part of this is about people taking responsibility for their own health, in some cases self-medicating, self-care and so on. And of course we have health and social care professionals, so people don't want to take responsibility for their own lives, they want us to look after them, i.e. it's not about the needs of those particular people, it is about the needs of them and their professional interests. Now, I talked in that context about health professionals and social care professionals. I could just as easily be talking about engineers, planners, people who work at Job Centre Plus and so on. And it is all about, I think, that institutional self-preservation rather than the job we need to do.
I think that's interesting that certainly in the group I was in earlier, we were talking about what the future looks like, and it is more about how can we get more self-help groups going, sharing networks, those sorts of things. So that's really interesting.
Well, it's also how we can get people in a genuine way, working in multi-agency teams, working across professional barriers to achieve common outcomes. And that, I think, is the biggest single task we face. And I think we know how to do that. Knowing how to do it and actually doing it. And because we know how to do it, because we know it's going to be difficult.